And now, it's The Law Show on CL 650. A comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law. Now, here's Sterling Fox.
Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so cross your heart? Do you swear to tell the truth? Cross your heart. It's The Law Show here on CIL 650. Good morning and welcome to the program. A pleasure to have you with us. We are joined in studio by the founding partners of Westside Family Law. Mark Perry and Anna Perry are back with us in studio. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Tell us a little bit about Westside Family Law. Mark,
Sure.
The firm has been around in Vancouver for how many years?
Well, Anna and I both have practiced for a lot longer than the firm's been around.
True.
But we started the firm in July of 2011.
Okay.
And so we're just over 4 years now. But my own personal career in the practice of law, I'm coming up to 29 years in September.
All of those years in the practice of family law, Mark?
No, not quite. The majority of those years. I did some other areas of law in my formative years at the bar, and I actually worked for the government for a couple of years way back in the late 1980s as well.
Mm-hmm. And Anna, your practice as a lawyer has been quite diverse, and so the firm was begun about 4 years or so ago. Since the inception of Westside Family Law, have you dedicated almost all of your practice time to family matters now?
Definitely, 100%.
Okay. And it's simply because it's so demanding now, right?
Oh, definitely. It's certainly an interesting area and very exciting. I certainly wouldn't work in anything else now.
Okay. One aspect of family law, and of course when we're talking about family law, we're talking about divorces and the breakup of relationships and that sort of thing. And when you start talking about divorce issues, Mark, to Canadians, especially to, well, I think any of us, regardless of our province of residence, we understand that it's a kind of a twofold jurisdiction thing. Mm-hmm. There is a federal law that is in effect everywhere in Canada called the Divorce Act, and that governs the dissolution of marriage. But in each and every Canadian province, they handle some of the other details
That's right.
in their own way. For example, here in BC, we have something called the Family Law Act. That's been around now for, about a year and a half, right?
Right.
So how does it break out? Who gets jurisdiction over what? This overarching federal, provincial divorce business.
Right. Well, I think it's important to know this goes back to effectively the Canadian Constitution. So this really goes back to 1867 and the division of powers between the federal government and the provincial governments. Okay, so that family law is just another example of what we hear from time to time about disputes between federal government and provincial governments. So the federal government Divorce Act deals with the ending of illegal marriage,
right?
Child support, spousal support, and care, guardianship of children.
Okay.
So those are the areas that the Divorce Act covers. The provincial legislation, the Family Law Act in this province, addresses division of property, because property rights are provincial in the division between federal and provincial. But it also addresses child support, spousal support, and care of children. So there's an overlap on those three issues. Provincial legislation deals with division of property, and federal legislation deals with those issues, not division of property, but divorce.
So from the outside looking in, Anna, does a person going through the emotional trauma of a breakup of a relationship and seeking legal counsel and all the rest of it, does an individual have to worry him or herself about federal law versus provincial law or any of that kind of stuff? Or is it sort of integrated in 2015 so that the lawyers take care of all of that and people just carry on?
Good question. I would say that to a certain extent you have to think about it because the Divorce Act divorces you. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people are quite surprised to learn that they could get married on the top of a hill in Italy and have to go to the Supreme Court of, say, British Columbia, if that's where they're residing, go to the Supreme Court and go through all this rigmarole to get divorced.
Okay.
Under the federal Divorce Act, because the Family Law Act doesn't talk about it.
The Family Law Act doesn't actually address the matter of the dissolution of the relationship?
Of the
Correct.
marriage.
Of the marriage. Ah.
That's right.
So the rules for the Divorce Act are the same in every corner of Canada,
Pretty
given
well.
that
Absolutely.
it's a federal law.
Yes.
But
Yes.
in every province of Canada, the details may differ.
That's right.
Okay,
That's
so
correct.
what do we do differently in British Columbia, for example, that is kind of unique or different that they don't do maybe anywhere else in Canada? I know the list for Quebec would probably be the longest,
Yes.
but what do we do?
That's
What do
what
we
came to
do
mind.
here in BC that's a little different?
Well, actually, there's quite a harmonization of provincial laws across the country.
Okay.
So there has certainly been a movement towards the laws being similar provincially. Alberta does some different things in terms of division of property, and Ontario also does some different things with division of property, but they're not significant. Support issues are very similar in all provinces, and that's partly because we have the federal child support guidelines, which is the federal government coming up with guidelines that pretty well every province adopts.
Okay.
And then we also have spousal support advisory guidelines, not promoted by the government so much as but created and adopted pretty well by every province. So again, there's quite similar rules in place.
Right. So, Anna, the idea, I guess, behind this, at least in part, must have been so that you couldn't get married in British Columbia and then run off to New Brunswick and take a job in the woods and therefore never be found again and not responsible for any support payments or that kind of thing. Eventually, BC and New Brunswick would talk. They would find out where you were and they would catch up to you. That's all part of the package, isn't it?
Yes, it is. If you have an enforceable an agreement or a court order, and you can get an agreement side by side. You have to have the other person's participation, but you can get a court order in absentia. So if the other person runs off to the woods, for example, I don't know, maybe making maple syrup or whatever might do in the woods. But in any event, you can get an order in absentia. And there's the cross-Canada different family maintenance enforcement program. They're called something different in each province, but they all work together. So
okay.
BC's family maintenance enforcement program would contact, where did you say he was? In
New
New Brunswick, yeah.
New Brunswick in the trees.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Is this a friend of yours?
No, it's not, as a matter of fact. But we are. I mean,
Right.
it's a fact. We are the second largest country on Earth. It used to be, with a tiny population, it used to be really easy for someone to disappear
Sure.
in Canada.
Right.
And so with the 2015 technology available at the fingertips of all, these disappearances are becoming less and less
Right.
routine, aren't they?
You got to unplug. You got to get off the grid, I think, in order
Yeah.
to disappear nowadays.
Yeah, I would add that the more difficult scenario is when the person is self-employed and getting paid in cash or what have you. And we still do have some instances of that, but more and more, rather than going to New Brunswick, we have a lot of people working internationally.
Right, sure.
And so what gets them eventually is the enforcement branches have the right to revoke a passport.
Right.
So it's actually the federal government's right to revoke the passport on the request of the enforcement branches. And so in order to keep your job overseas, you have to have a valid passport.
Absolutely.
And so that's a very powerful tool. I was about to say weapon. It's not really a weapon. It's a tool. So in addition to suspending a driver's license, suspending or revoking a passport, they've got some pretty, what would I say, very effective tools to use.
So there are consequences for this this behavior, and now it's quite likely that apprehension is also going to occur, isn't it?
It can, yeah. And so the bottom line is that people really need to come forward and deal with support orders if they're evading it because they can't afford it. Because there's been a change of circumstances, then they need to just deal with that. As unreasonable as their other party might be, it's far better than having your passport revoked.
Right, right. There was a quote that I had earlier, and it was about the argument. It was about the woman and the man having an argument, Anna, and it was somewhere in it has something to do with when the argument takes place, the woman always gets the last word. Anything after that said by the man is essentially the beginning of the next argument.
Yes.
Now that's a really helpful little phrase. I suppose, if for no other reason, understanding how lawyers think, Mark, in a lot of these cases.
Sure, absolutely. Yep. Yeah.
If I could just remind you what
Please
what
do.
the
Yes,
truism
yes.
was.
Yeah.
It's a woman has the last word in any argument. Anything a man has to say after that is the beginning of a new argument. And
Now, to who is that attributed, by the way?
I honestly don't know.
I think it's a woman. I'm going to bet it's a woman.
But it would be good advice to put into prenuptial agreements or
Right.
marriage agreements or what have you. Certainly in a separation agreement, it's too late.
Yeah.
That advice.
That's right. Well, one of the things we were going to hope to talk about on the program today, and Mark, you're big on this. This is something that, as a person who's been in family law for close to 30 years, you've seen, I would have imagined by now, dozens, if not hundreds of cases crossing your desk where if there had been a prenup in place, a lot of this stuff simply wouldn't be happening today
Right.
to the degree that it is.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's universally true without too much question. And let's be clear, what wouldn't be happening wouldn't be the amount of argument, dispute, heartbreak
Right.
over resolving the issues that now exist to go your separate ways, because you would have set out in a contract in advance what's going to happen. If we separate, this is what's going to happen. I will keep this, I will get that.
Right.
You will pay this, you will receive this. It's all sort of set out. Now that's not to say there isn't an ability from time to time to argue that that should be varied, or that the agreement itself should be set aside for whatever reason if
Right.
it's not properly prepared, but it certainly almost universally reduces the amount of argument that people will have.
Anna, is a prenuptial agreement recommended for everyone considering marriage, or are there certain personality types or circumstances that would make it more important than in others?
My personal bent is that I think everybody should consider before they get married what they're going to do about things like financial budgeting and having children and who stays home. They should actually have that's what I do in my prenuptial agreements is we don't just talk about separation, we talk about the marriage.
Right.
How they're going to manage their property, who's going to, like, they're contemplating buying a house. Does husband know that wife is going to keep title to the house, and his expectation perhaps is he's going to be on title jointly, although she owns the house or the wife is buying the house. So there's those sorts of things to sort out that just sort of head off an argument. And I've actually had people who don't get married or don't move in together in a common law relationship because all of a sudden they discover when we're doing a prenuptial or cohabitation agreement that they have fundamental differences about having children, for example.
I was just going to say that in the course of, and I'm sure, Mark, because
Yes.
you help people put these agreements together,
Absolutely.
that in the course of the conversations surrounding a prenuptial agreement, I mean, this involves, you're almost talking contract law to a
Yes.
certain extent.
Yeah.
The romantic blush, the rose-colored glasses have to come off.
Right.
And for these conversations, I would imagine, in many cases, this is the first time the two individuals have had to talk about these issues.
Which is a very frightening concept.
It is.
It really is. I mean, I echo what Anna says. I mean, when I'm doing a prenuptial agreement, like when Anna is, we're meeting with one of the two parties, and you start asking them some questions about what is their plan, and
they'll say things like, "Well, we've not actually talked about that
Right.
before."
Right. Right.
And you're expecting this. Anna's looking at me. Yeah, that's what a lot of them say.
That's right.
And
Right.
yes, they should have these
Right,
conversations.
and there's an element of agreements. I may not go into as much depth as Anna does about how they're going to plan their life during the marriage. I'm talking about mostly when I'm drawing up an agreement, what happens afterwards. but it's still this part of the same continuum of issues that need to be discussed.
Right.
So, often I'm sitting down with somebody and they may be, dewy-eyed and thinking about the romantic blush,
Absolutely.
to use your phrase,
Yeah.
and I'm giving them a bit of a reality check, partly saying, in order for me to prepare this contract, I need to know what is going to happen. So here's what I suggest you do. You need to sit down with your partner-to-be and have this discussion.
Right. Well, and I think I've told you anecdotally that I sat down with my daughter, who's engaged, lovely sparkler too, and about about this prenuptial thing, and my daughter gets right into my face and says, "Dad, do you have any idea how unromantic you're being right now?" And I said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I completely get it." Well, but her sentiment was, you're messing with something that's really, kind of sweet and kind of nice. And I'm just trying to do my dadly duty. But, it is, Mark, it is in many cases almost a topic of conversation that couples would go to some extent to avoid, lest they sort of tarnish the bloom of it all.
Right. Well, in Canada there was an awful lot of emphasis way back in people having marriage preparation courses, particularly if they were getting married through the church.
Many churches, absolutely,
yes. And those are brilliant. I mean, they were well thought through.
And they made you talk about things.
Exactly.
Right.
Here's a budget.
Budgeting.
Here's a budget. Here's what your income is. Here's what your expenses are going to be.
Right.
Perhaps one of the parties to a marriage might think, we're going to be buying the house on the west side within a year of getting married, and here's the reality check. Or perhaps one of the parties is saying, I'm going to, subsequent to marriage, stop working and go
babies.
back to or go to school and earn an income. Okay, well, let's see what that looks like. That was part of what we sometimes now are doing with people, is we're doing a bit of a marriage preparation course, if you like, by asking questions and forcing them to think about what those answers are going to be.
Our guests today on The Law Show here on CIL 650 are the founding partners of Westside Family Law, which, by the way, is at 1367 West Broadway and online at westsidefamilylaw.ca. Back with lots more with Mark Perry and Anna Perry after this.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CIL 650.